Before entering the palace, he had a family. There was his grandfather, who crafted crickets for him to play with, left him half a piece of bread, and, upon hearing that his father intended to send him to the palace to save food, was willing to starve himself instead. But now, he was merely a lowly eunuch, forced to bow his head and be addressed as grandfather by others. His own wishes no longer mattered. The first time Zhang Fengyun was openly called a castrated servant was in his 13th year in the palace. Upon hearing of it, Qi Yun tried to console him. Only the important figures get berated by officials like that. For someone like me, no one bothers cursing, because no one even knows I exist. The official who insulted him was named Yang Ji. There were many officials like Yang Ji in the capital. Young, proud, full of literary charm, and utterly fearless. In their smooth, privileged lives, they had yet to encounter anything truly intimidating. If anyone else had insulted him, Zhang Fengyun might not have even furrowed his brow. But Yang Ji was a little different. Yang Ji was a close colleague of Scholar Shen, not his student, not a fellow countryman, and quite older than him. But perhaps because of similar views and temperaments, Shen admired and looked out for him. Given how aligned they were in views and temperaments, if Shen Scholar knew that Yang Ji had insulted Zhang Fengyun, he would probably nod slightly in approval. Scholar Shen might even regret not having been more dismissive in the past when he was teaching at the Inner Academy. If he had, maybe no one like Zhang Fengyun would have emerged among the young eunuchs he once taught. When he first entered the Inner Academy, Zhang Fengyun was 11 years old. After nearly 2 years of cleaning in the palace, he had learned when to kneel quickly, bow his head, confess his mistakes, and sink himself into the mud. The day he was noticed, he saw the leading eunuch point him out to another man who approached him. Quickly, Zhang threw down his broom, lowered his head, and prepared to kneel. But the expected reprimand didn't come. The newcomer just nodded and said, "He seems decent enough. Let him start studying then." He entered the Inner Academy along with over 200 other young boys, all around 10 years old, the oldest being 12 or 13. Fengyun remembered the day they began. They stood in the courtyard, guided by older eunuchs who had already studied for several years. Hundreds stood in line, hands at their sides, while court scholar Su gave them an orientation. "You are all eunuchs, so you won't be studying to pass exams. Studying the classics and histories here is to prepare you for official duties, so you can understand arithmetic and our dynasty systems and serve well in the future." Only after that did a collective "yes, sir" echo in the silent courtyard. They started with the 100 family surnames and the 1,000-character classic, then moved on to the Mencius. When they reached that text, one of their teachers, whose mother had suddenly fallen ill, returned home to mourn. Each teacher in the Inner Academy was carefully selected, so if one left, another would have to replace him. The replacement was Shun Pu, Scholar Shen. Qi Yun said Scholar Shen was a brilliant writer with a bad temper. He didn't want to teach in the Inner Academy, but couldn't refuse court scholar Su's repeated invitations. They were peers in the imperial examination, Qi Yun explained, so he couldn't reject him outright. Fengyun asked, how do you know so much? You seem to know everything." Qi Yun chuckled and replied, "Of course, my godfather told me." Unlike Fengyun, who had only been a cleaner before joining the academy, Qi Yun had already found his way, claiming an influential eunuch as his godfather and securing an easier job as a key holder for the palace's book vault. When the Inner Academy began recruiting, Qi Yun hadn't wanted to join. He didn't enjoy reading or writing, preferring his leisurely book vault post. But his godfather had told him that, as a eunuch, his only chance of rising through the ranks was through the Inner Academy. Learning and literacy were essential if he wanted to join the Directorate of Ceremonial and climb the ladder. However, Qi Yun's aptitude for reading and writing didn't match his knack for networking. Every assessment in the academy, he would secretly seek Fengyun's help to get by. In gratitude, he shared everything with Fengyun: food, drink, and information. For example, he'd share that court scholar Su was marrying off his daughter in a few days, or that Scholar Yang had argued with the emperor in court the previous day. or that the best position upon graduation was naturally the secretariat, where they handled official documents daily and had the easiest route to the Directorate of Ceremonial. If that failed, the Hamlin Academy would also suffice. Or he might tell Feng Yun that Eunuch's son had accompanied the emperor to a feast the previous night, during which the emperor, in a sudden rage, nearly beat 2 palace maids to death. The Empress Dowager, furious when she found out, suspected Eunuch Feng of telling her and had been cold to him ever since. They all called Eunuch Feng grandfather or ancestor, even though he didn't recognize any of them as his descendants. Feng Yun inwardly resented calling him grandfather. He would never address him as such unless forced to. After all, he had a grandfather of his own, his real, flesh and blood grandfather. His grandfather had crafted crickets from straw for him to play with and saved half a piece of bread for him to eat. On the day his father took him to be castrated, his grandfather had wobbled to block the door, saying, "If you don't send him, he'll need his share of food, and we don't have enough. Send him to the palace, and he might survive." Feng Yun remembered his grandfather's words. "Then I'll wait in the mountains to die and leave you all with a bit more food." In a fit of frustration, his father gave the old man a gentle push and dragged Feng Yun away. Feng Yun looked back, watching his grandfather slowly collapse. He was too weak from hunger to withstand even a slight push. Did grandfather eventually get up? Was he hurt? Did Feng Yun's absence allow his family to survive? He wanted to know, but there was no one to ask and no way to find out. People privately said that Scholarshan's classes were difficult to follow. For other teachers, a lesson simply involved reading comprehension and explaining the literal meaning of words. But Shen Pu's lectures often went far beyond, touching on topics from Zhengguan Zhengyao to Dashua Yeni, which left most people in a haze. When he discussed statecraft and the principles of governance, advocating the people above all and the monarch as secondary, everyone exchanged bewildered glances. And by the time he spoke of imperial duty, urging the ruler to uphold justice and discipline within the palace, students dared not show a hint of expression, sitting with lowered eyes. I wonder how our ancestors would react if they heard this. How did Scholar Su ever think of bringing in this teacher? After class, everyone whispered, yet Feng Yun stayed silent. Feng Yun liked Scholar Shen and enjoyed listening to his lectures on Zhengguan Zhengyao. He didn't find it difficult to understand. After class, he would often ask Qi Yun to help him borrow books from the Inner Study on Governance and the Art of Ruling the World. But reading on his own was far less illuminating than hearing Scholar Shen explain it. The other teachers would often say things like, "Someday when you serve the emperor, this is how you should act," or "If you grasp this level of understanding, that's enough. Don't press yourself too hard." But Scholar Shen never said such things. He didn't seem to consider who his students were or how much he should explain. He simply taught what he believed to be essential, regardless of whether his audience was eunuchs or scholars. Feng Yun especially enjoyed doing Scholar Shen's assignments. Shen would give only a single phrase as a topic, letting the students develop their ideas as they pleased. In the following class, he would pick a few essays to discuss, elaborating freely on them and effortlessly weaving new insights into his analysis. Though Scholar Shen never chose one of Feng Yun's papers, Feng Yun still devoted himself to each one, revising it with all his effort. Qi Yun, however, struggled. After about 100 characters, he would scratch his head, unable to go further. Qi Yun begged Feng Yun to write one for him, as he had previously been punished twice with a beating on the palms for incomplete assignments. If he failed again, and one of the senior eunuchs noticed, it might be reported to the supervising eunuch, putting his future at risk. Even his chance of being assigned to the clerical division would be uncertain. This wasn't the first time Feng Yun had completed Qi Yun's homework. He could already mimic Qi Yun's handwriting with 70 to 80% accuracy. Seeing Qi Yun's desperate pleas, he agreed, though there was only one day left to submit, so he could only manage a passable job rather than a polished one. When they submitted the assignments, a few days later, Scholar Shen started the class by shouting, "Jiang Feng Yun, Zhao Qi Yun, step forward." The two of them stood in front of Shun's desk, where their essays lay on top, singled out. If you write poorly, or even if you can't write at all, I can at least respect you for your honesty and limited skill, Shun began. But using a ghostwriter is deceitful. And as for the ghostwriter, even if the essay is a masterpiece, it reveals flawed character and a lack of principle. Scholar Shin glared down at the rest of the class, not even glancing at the two of them. For you, already set on a life in the palace, the gravest sin is private moral decay that blinds others to the truth. From now on, neither of you will be required to turn in any more assignments for me. This incident was soon reported by other eunuchs to the supervising eunuch, who punished both of them by having them stand with bent knees for the time it took 2 sticks of incense to burn. Chi-yun grumbled, "I'd rather have been beaten on the palms. The pain would pass quickly enough, but standing like this leaves me dizzy and sick. Many people even throw up. I don't know who snitched, but if I find out, I'll be sure to make them suffer for it." Fong Yun remained silent. Shin Pu hadn't reported them out of leniency. In his eyes, these eunuchs already embodied a lack of virtue. He reprimanded them, but he didn't believe they would change. He didn't think they would become better from punishment. What he had chosen was to abandon them, to keep his distance and protect himself. Chi-yun continued, "So, do you really think we don't have to turn in his assignments anymore? If we don't submit, the supervising eunuch might punish us, right? But if we do, Shun won't even read them. Isn't it all just pointless work?" Fong Yun replied that, of course, they would still submit. He had already decided that no matter how Scholar Shin reacted, he would continue to complete his assignments. After standing through 1 stick of incense, Fong Yun started to feel faint. But Chi-yun, still full of energy, suddenly asked, "How did he figure it out?" "I looked at the piece you wrote for me, and I couldn't even tell it wasn't my writing." "Then it wasn't the handwriting, it was the writing style." Fong Yun, dizzy, answered automatically, but as soon as the words left his mouth, he felt a surge of clarity. Yes, it was the writing style, the eye for structure, the nuance in the argument. Although Scholar Shin had never chosen his essays, he could recognize Fong Yun's writing immediately. It was the style. Fong Yun repeated, smiling, before collapsing to the floor. Chi-yun didn't fret long about whether to turn in Scholar Shin's assignments. After just 1 more lesson, Shun was replaced by a new academic who would be teaching them. It was said that Shun Pu had once again brought up Emperor Hongwu's iron plaque in class. Fong Yun knew well of the plaque. Every eunuch studying at the inner academy knew it, and the mere mention of it would make their hearts skip a beat. Eunuchs must not interfere in politics. Those who do will be executed. Although the plaque remained in the imperial city in Nanjing, and later emperors rarely mentioned it, it was still a sword hanging over all their heads. When the emperor was in a good mood, they could study, practice calligraphy, and even wield authority in official documents, beyond the reproach of scholars and ministers. But if the emperor's mood soured, they would be condemned for even a single misstep. It was an irrefutable law set by their ancestors, beyond argument. Shun Pu had often referenced this principle, and so the supervising eunuch naturally grew displeased. But Shun Pu had never wanted to teach them anyway. Now that someone else was assigned to replace him, he was happy to step aside, skipping a final farewell. The new instructor was very kind, and everyone whispered that it was good to finally be rid of stern Shin Pu. "I thought Scholar Shin taught well." Fong Yun defended him. The others laughed. "Fong Yun, he practically called you morally lacking and of low character, and he wouldn't change his opinion of you just because you speak well of him." After the others scattered, Chi-yun said, "They aren't wrong, you know. Scholar Shin never liked us eunuchs. Nothing you say will make him change his mind, so save your breath and don't let people mock you for it." Fong Yun thought to himself that, in time, nobody would bring up Scholar Shin again. In court, their paths would never cross with someone of Shun's rank. But Fong Yun forgot that they would not always be eunuchs studying in the inner academy. In time, each of them would be assigned their own duties. Fong Yun hadn't expected that even after swearing allegiance to his godfather, Qi Yun would still end up in the inner library handling keys, while he himself was assigned to the central secretariat, responsible for preparing scrolls, fans, and other decorative items written by the secretariat scribes. When the palace needed placards or other script-based decorations not outsourced, it would be their duty. Qi Yun clicked his tongue with envy, saying that while it might only seem like handling calligraphy, these items were presented to the emperor, and if the emperor admired his handwriting, he might one day be promoted to a scribe of the Secretary Bureau. Qi Yun, still clinging to dreams of the Secretary Bureau, finally admitted that he wasn't cut out for academic study. That path was closed to him. "I'll just focus on making my godfather happy," he said candidly, which made Feng Yun burst out laughing. The affairs of the imperial book room were complicated and tedious. Books and paintings had to be collected, organized, and properly categorized, with any additions or removals promptly recorded. There were few young eunuchs in the imperial book room. So many of the physical tasks, like carrying books, fell to Feng Yun. Often, he had no time to rest throughout the day. In the chaos, mistakes happened. Feng Yun mistakenly switched the gift lists for Empress Wang and Consort Zheng, and the eunuchs who were preparing the gifts followed the incorrect list. Consort Zheng, already highly favored by the emperor and having recently given birth to a princess, heard that Empress Wang had received more gifts than she had, and she made a scene, eventually causing the matter to reach the emperor. By the time Feng Yun was summoned, everyone in the book room knew something was wrong. Some advised him to beg for mercy. Others suggested he feign fainting, fearing he might be beaten to death. One senior eunuch, with no tact, bluntly asked him if there was anything he wanted to leave behind, in case he didn't return. Feng Yun had long been familiar with the practice of begging for mercy, but he had always thought that after studying and learning to write, he wouldn't need to do such menial labor anymore. He thought his life would be slightly different. But now, as he quickly kneeled in front of the throne, banging his forehead on the ground with loud thuds, he realized there was no difference. His life was still fragile and trembling, still like a blade of grass to be trampled upon at will. The only change was who had the power to dispose of him. In the past, it might have been any old eunuch. Now, it was the emperor and Consort Zheng. In the past, he might have been able to earn the sympathy of an older eunuch by groveling and shedding tears. But Consort Zheng and the emperor, far removed from the fear of ants, were indifferent to his pleading. He heard someone say, "Beat him." There was no mention of how many blows he would receive, which meant his fate was dire. At first, he tried to count the strikes, but soon he lost track. Eventually, he felt as if his body had become nothing more than a slab of meat. When he was a child, before the famine struck, his family had slaughtered a pig with the neighbors. As they divided the meat, each slice was accompanied by a dull, dry thud that gradually became damp. Perhaps it was the blood mixed in, or maybe it was because the meat was about to be beaten into paste. "Your Majesty, I just remembered something I need to report." Feng Yun heard a voice. "You've been standing beside me for so long, and now you remember something?" The emperor's voice sounded displeased, but he still instructed Consort Zheng to leave. Once she was gone, the emperor waved his hand. "Stop." Feng Yun vaguely knew he was being carried away. When he woke up, he found himself lying on his bed, with Qi Yun outside by the window, focused on stoking the fire. Qi Yun's had popped in when he saw that Feng Yun had woken up. "The medicine's being cooked outside. Don't move, I just applied ointment to your backside. What are you glaring at me for? Should I prioritize your face or your life?" I said, "You're lucky to be alive. After so many blows, you could have died. When you weren't awake, I really feared you wouldn't make it." Qi Yun, overly happy that Feng Yun had survived, chattered away about everything, from how he had been carried back to how everyone had rushed to the hospital for medicine when they learned what happened. "By the way, Godfather said that when you're well enough to walk, you should go thank the supervisor." "Supervisor?" Feng Yun was confused. Zhang Jing, the supervisor. Zhang Jing was in charge of the Eastern Depot eunuchs. According to Qi Yun, When the former patriarch Feng Bao was dismissed from the palace by the emperor, Zhang Jing had played a significant role in strategizing the move. Feng Yun was no fool. He quickly realized that the matter to report likely came from Zhang Jing. Whether it was genuinely important or whether Zhang Jing simply wanted to help him, it didn't matter. The visit was an opportunity. A few days later, when he was finally able to stand and walk, Feng Yun went to visit Zhang Jing. "You can walk now." Zhang Jing looked up from the memorials. "That was quick. I have a bottle of medicine here. Take it with you." "Thank you, Supervisor." Feng Yun immediately knelt, sincerely thankful. A bottle of medicine doesn't require such a formal gesture. Feng Yun thanks the supervisor for saving my life. "It was careless," Zhang Jing replied, slowly. "But I've learned my lesson. I don't think I'll make this mistake again. I'll remember and never repeat it." This lesson was harsh enough to make him realize that a life like his, so easily dismissed, was as fragile as a list of gifts. "The characters on that list are quite beautiful," Zhang Jing continued after a pause. "Ask the inner academy to look at your past work." Feng Yun paused, understanding the implication. "From now on, be careful. If you ever become a supervisor of the Imperial Service and make such a mistake again, it could cost you your life." Feng Yun bowed deeply, saying, "I will remember, Supervisor." He understood this as Zhang Jing formally taking him under his wing. Whether he called him father or grandfather would depend on Zhang Jing's preference. A sense of melancholy mixed with excitement filled him. At this moment, he suddenly thought of his grandfather. Had he gotten up that day? Had his family survived? If one day he really entered the Imperial Secretariat, could he find out what happened to his family? Once he had fully recovered, Feng Yun remained at the Zhongshu. Zhang Jing seemed to want to wait for the emperor and consort Zheng to completely forget about this careless person. Although Feng Yun didn't think they would even remember his face or name. It wasn't until 10 months later, in the autumn, that he officially entered the Imperial Ceremonial Office. He recalled the weather that day, clear skies and golden leaves. As he walked to the cabinet to receive the memorials, he looked up and saw a flock of wild geese flying overhead. Qi Yun occasionally brought him gossip, asking if certain officials had quarreled, or whether a particular memorial often made the emperor angry. Feng Yun laughed and replied, "I'm just moving the memorials between the cabinet and the Imperial Ceremonial Office now. I probably know less about what's going on inside than you do." Qi Yun pouted, saying, "Looks like I can't count on you to help me once you've made it. My godfather got a post at the Shiqin department, so I'll go there with him." The Shiqin department was in charge of managing the palace's charcoal. It was a good position. But the office was on Zashika Street, and from then on, the two would likely see each other less. Qi Yun said, "When I have money later, I'll buy a house outside. We can drink wine, listen to music, and even hire a few people to serve us." Feng Yun thought about saying that drinking wine and listening to music were fine, but hiring people to serve was cruel. But before the words left his mouth, he swallowed them back. After all, it was just a dream. Who would care about whether someone killed, robbed, or committed other crimes in their dreams? After more than a year of receiving memorials, Feng Yun became an attendant eunuch. He could finally hear the topics Qi Yun was so interested in, but now, he passed them on to Zhang Jing instead of Qi Yun. Zhang Jing asked detailed questions, not only about what people said, but also about their tone, pitch, and expression. He carefully considered these details, using them to understand the true positions of various court officials, the emperor's inclinations, and to decide who to win over, who to guard against, and how to advise the emperor. Feng Yun remembered everything carefully and spoke in detail. He knew Zhang Jing had saved him from the punishment under the board for this very purpose. But so what? If he could trade this for his life, why not? No one valued his life, so he would value it himself. The first time I heard Yang Ji's name was when a couple of eunuchs were reviewing a memorial. One of them said, "It's well written, but it makes you angry after reading it." The other took a closer look at the signature and asked, "Yang Ji, which department is this from?" No one in the room knew, but Zhang Jing didn't need to ask. After a moment's thought, he recalled, Yang Ji, an official at the 8th rank in the Hanlin Academy. What's the memorial about? It's about Li Jinhai, the head of the Saving Fire Department, deceiving the emperor, exploiting merchants, and lining his own pockets. Zhang Jing laughed and said, the lower the rank, the more they love to criticize. If they get dismissed for it, no big deal, but if they do it well, they can rise quickly. Otherwise, they'll just step on the emperor or us to make a name for themselves. The memorial is kept in the archives and not sent out, so it seems the emperor doesn't intend to punish Li Jinhai. Yang Ji is close with Shen Pu and a few others. I think he's the type who's stubborn and dislikes us eunuchs. Since the memorial was kept, there might be more to come. Sure enough, the next day, Yang Ji sent another memorial, still about the Saving Fire Department and Li Jinhai. This one was more forceful, using even bolder language, implying that if the emperor didn't take action, it would be as though he were complicit. At first, the people in the supervisory department could still joke about the memorial's eloquence, but now, upon seeing Yang Ji written on it, their faces darkened. The contents of the memorial, whether leaked from the inner cabinet or from Yang Ji himself, had a certain certainty to them, making it hard for anyone to doubt. That was the only reason for such audacity and persistence. What's written in this memorial is truly exaggerated. Li Jinhai came to see Zhang Jing, looking pitiful as he sat at the lower seat. You don't need to feel so wronged, Zhang Jing said with a smile. Other than exaggerating a bit, has anything here truly wronged you? Looks like they've been watching you for quite a while, but you didn't even notice. Li Jinhai nodded like a garlic clove, begging Zhang Jing for help. Of course they'll help. If they succeed this time, who knows who they'll target next? Maybe the Bank of Precious Bills or the Imperial Horse Bureau. Eventually, it could be the Eastern Depot or the Supervisory Department. Zhang Jing stopped smiling, motioning for Li Jinhai to lift his head. Don't be so scared. It would be best if this matter could be resolved quietly, but it was clear that Yang Ji was going to bring the issue to the emperor. Once the emperor became angry, Yang Ji would surely suffer, but Li Jinhai's consequences would likely be worse than what he deserved. It was better to admit guilt now, though the blame shouldn't fall entirely on him. He was at most guilty of failing to manage his subordinates and neglecting supervision. Feng Yun understood the plan. Find a scapegoat. The person couldn't be too clean, or the story wouldn't hold up, but they also couldn't know too much. Once someone entered prison, no one was reliable, and they might end up spilling secrets. Pick someone who's been around for a while and has handled some matters. Zhang Jing suddenly glanced at Feng Yun, who was standing in the corner, and added, choose someone you're willing to sacrifice. Feng Yun understood. This was Zhang Jing's way of reassuring him. Don't worry, you're the one they're willing to sacrifice. Just keep doing your work faithfully. Li Jinhai hesitated for a moment, then raised his head and said, there's someone named Zhao Qiyun. He'd be suitable. Feng Yun thought long into the night, but couldn't come up with a good plan to save Qiyun. At this point, if they wanted Qiyun to return to the inner library, Li Jinhai probably wouldn't let him go. The next day, Yang Ji's memorial came again, and both the inner cabinet and the supervisory department had plenty of comments to make. The noise caused the emperor to feel dizzy, walking in circles around the bronze crane incense burner. Finally, growing impatient, he waved his hand for silence. Perhaps to relieve his boredom, he noticed Feng Yun standing by the bronze crane and suddenly asked, what do you think? How should we handle this? Feng Yun hurriedly knelt and lowered his head. This servant is too ignorant to know what should be done. However, if what Lord Yang says is true, the Saving Fire Department has made a mistake. But if it were me, I would probably make the same mistake, using these muddled methods. Feng Yun kept his head lowered, unable to see that everyone was now watching him, but he saw the emperor's feet stop in place. He took a deep breath and continued. The Ministry of Revenue must consider the state's finances, and every penny has its purpose. But the price of Hongluo charcoal has risen, and the Saving Fire Department can't do anything about it. If we ask the Ministry of Revenue for money and they agree, they'll have to cut spending elsewhere. If they refuse, there'll be endless arguments and we'll be troubling the emperor. If the Ministry of Revenue eventually agrees, the censors will complain about how much money is being spent in the palace, accusing us of extravagance. But if we can't afford enough Hongluo charcoal and the palace suffers from the cold, then those of us who serve in the palace will never be able to repay our sins. Feng Yun's voice grew even more solemn. So, it's better to make a mistake ourselves. If we can lower the price of Hongluo charcoal, it would be fine even if we are accused of exploiting merchants. If we've accepted bribes, we can use the money to cover the shortfall, and if we're reported, we'll have no complaints. We only wish to ease the emperor's burdens. If it were me, I would accept the punishment without regret. The room fell silent. Though Feng Yun's words were exaggerated and embellished, there was one truth everyone knew. The inner officials served the emperor and were only accountable to him. The power to abuse others and line their own pockets came from the emperor's authority. Moreover, each department kept some hidden funds, but they did take some of that money to buy things urgently needed for the palace. In the end, it all could be tied back to the emperor. If Yang Ji succeeded in his memorial this time, the next target might indeed be the supervisory department, but eventually, the focus would likely shift to the emperor's choice to employ these inner officials. This was a sentiment that the head eunuch and the secretarial eunuchs dared not voice, but it was perfectly fitting for Feng Yun, a lowly inner eunuch, to speak out. "Get up," the emperor continued walking around the crane, then knocked on the crane's head and said, "Keep the memorial here. The next time, the inner cabinet doesn't need to send this kind of memorial anymore." It was clear the emperor planned to drag this matter out. But since the emperor was willing to delay, there was no reason it couldn't be delayed. But what about next time? Whether it was Qiyun or him, or anyone else in the inner library, would they unknowingly wait for their lives to end, unable to speak, unable to defend themselves? No one knew, and there was no way to stop it. When Qiyun went to the palace to carry out his duties, Feng Yun informed him of the situation and advised him to request a return to the inner library.
Qiyun refused.
He said he had come to terms with things. No matter where he went, he would be treated like dirt or prey, but at the Shixing department, at least he could get a little oil from the scraps others left behind. Even if one day he became a scapegoat, it wouldn't be a completely unjust death. I've said it before, I want to save up some money and buy a house. Even a small one will do. If I can find my sister and nephew, I'll leave the house to them when I die. If not, I'll leave it to my godfather and you. You can divide it up. Qiyun stood up and dusted off the dirt from his clothes. There's no turning back for a person, Feng Yun. If I asked you to go sweep the long alley right now, would you go? Feng Yun didn't answer. He couldn't go back either. His answer in the palace that day had already spread among the scholars. Flattery and sycophancy, utterly disgraceful, was how the civil officials now saw him. It was even said that Yang Ji publicly scolded him as shameless several times. Shameless? Of course. He knew that Yang Ji's reports were true, and each of the cases was soaked in the blood and tears of the common people. Yet, he still chose to use eloquent words to cover it up. That was indeed shameless. But he couldn't bear to watch Qiyun die because of this. He still remembered the afternoon he woke up after being beaten, when Qiyun had been making medicine for him in the corridor. When he saw that he had woken up, Qiyun hurriedly lifted up his clothes, ran over, wiped his hands on his clothes, and bent down to bring him water to drink. He admired the civil official's courage to speak frankly, unafraid of death, but Qiyun was a sincere and kind companion to him. He couldn't ignore him. Zhang Jing appreciated Feng Yun's actions and gave him a token to enter the palace, so it would be easier for him to move around. Once he could leave the palace, Feng Yun did two things. First, he went back home to check on his family's condition. As expected, there was no trace of him. The old house had long collapsed, and the area was now inhabited by refugees. When people saw someone coming, they scattered. The second thing was to keep an eye on Yang Ji. He couldn't send his own people inside the palace, so he paid street ruffians, whom Qiyun had found, to do the job. Underhanded? Yes, but he had to keep watch. He wanted to see what kind of flawless gentleman Yang Ji truly was. Feng Yun had always known that no one was without weakness, but he never expected Yang Ji to be secretly meeting with a palace maid. We've been following her for 3 or 4 times, and we've seen the woman disguised as a young eunuch entering the city gate. There's no mistake. The ruffians were certain. After the woman entered the gate, Feng Yun followed her himself. Feng Yun didn't recognize the woman's appearance, but he knew how the young eunuchs walked, and it wasn't hard to spot the maid. After 2 tries, Feng Yun found her and followed her inside. When they reached a quieter area, the woman noticed Feng Yun trailing her and quickened her pace. Feng Yun said, "If you go further, you'll reach the residence of Lady Wang Gong. You don't want me to report to her and have her search for you, do you?" The palace maid turned around and immediately knelt, begging for her life. She knelt so naturally, as though she had done it 1,000 times before, but the fear in her was real, a fear that couldn't be masked no matter how many times she had done it. Feng Yun seemed to see himself in her. He squatted down, helped the maid up, and sighed. "Get up. Since you don't have the courage to do such reckless things, why take such risks?" Of course, this was an act driven by intense emotion, something Feng Yun couldn't understand. Song Yiju said she and Yang Ji were from the same hometown and had known each other before entering the palace. Once inside the palace, she felt lonely and hopeless. When she met Yang Ji again, she felt a deep attachment to him. Is this attachment worth risking such danger? If you're caught, it's a death sentence. Perhaps hearing the compassion in Feng Yun's words, Song Yiju begged again. "Please, eunuch, save me." She confessed that she was pregnant, but Yang Ji had not figured out a way to help her out of the palace. Yang Ji was despicable, coaxing Song Yiju into this act without considering her life. However, at this moment, Feng Yun did not feel satisfaction in proving Yang Ji's moral failings. If he used this incident to attack Yang Ji's reputation would surely suffer, but Song Yiju would lose her life. Feng Yun spent several nights considering his options and went to ask Zhang Jing for help. He wanted to meet with Lady Wang Gong and request that she share a meal with Song Yiju. Zhang Jing was surprised, thinking Feng Yun would not stoop to such a thing. It seemed he had misjudged him. Feng Yun explained that when he had been looked down upon in the past, Song Yiju had treated him kindly, and he had always remembered her kindness. "I see now you've caught Yang Ji in the act, but why wait so long to expose it? Turns out, you're afraid of touching something precious while trying to catch the mouse." It turned out that Zhang Jing already knew. He had his people watching Yang Ji, and whatever they found out, Zhang Jing was aware of it. Feng Yun nearly broke into a cold sweat. He had feared that asking for the meal would be too much, but now it seemed that if he hadn't suggested it today, Zhang Jing would have used the information to make a move, and Song Yiju's life would be in grave danger. Qi Yun came to deliver congratulations and laughed, saying he had bought a small 2-entry courtyard. If Feng Yun and Song Yiju wanted to go out when they were not on duty, they could stay there for a couple of days. Feng Yun took Song Yiju out of the palace and brought her to Yang Ji's door, asking her if she wanted to discuss their future together. Song Yiju hesitated for a long time outside the door, then came to her senses and said that Yang Ji had never truly cared for her. If it weren't for Feng Yun's help, within 2 months, her pregnancy would have been exposed, and her end would have been dreadful. From now on, I want nothing to do with Yang Ji. Since Song Yiju had said so, Feng Yun arranged for her to see a doctor and prescribed medicine for the miscarriage. He then settled her in Qi Yun's small house until she could walk again before bringing her back to the palace. This incident later became the reason for criticizing Feng Yun, accusing him of being overbearing and forcing the palace maid to share a meal with him, even preventing her from returning to the palace. Lady Wang Gong, as the mother of the crown prince, was helpless in this matter. This was in the 15th year after Feng Yun entered the palace. 2 years had passed since Yang Ji had openly scolded him as a castrated wretch. He was now able to calmly listen to the ongoing accusations in the memorials directed at him. He was accused of using Zhang Jing to gain power, accepting bribes, and bullying officials. The first 4 words in the accusation were the real point of contention. Feng Yun knew that Zhang Jing could not abandon him, just like he could not abandon Li Jinhai back then. However, this time, the civil officials were much more courageous than before, sending memorials one after another. Dragging things out would no longer work. Then let them go back to farming. If they don't remember how much disrespect they've shown to the emperor in their poetry, wine parties, and complaints, I'll remind them, Zhang Jing said, clearly keeping track of every detail, naming officials, including Yang Ji and Shen Pu. Feng Yun said, the scholars complain often, but His Majesty has always known that. Perhaps it will just be a light punishment, lashes or fines, but it shouldn't harm the foundation. I have a plan. Would the governor listen? Feng Yun suggested that if the officials continued to attack him, he would simply be thrown out of the palace. He saw Zhang Jing open his mouth as if to speak, but for the first time, Feng Yun ignored him and continued, I will admit my crimes in prison. Once I confess, I will likely be sentenced to death. The memorials accusing him, the governor knew, were false. He had done nothing wrong, and the officials who accused him were merely following the crowd without thinking. Feng Yun continued, once I die, take my remaining few belongings and show them to the emperor. Let them see how a loyal servant of the emperor is coerced into confessing. Ask the officials if they are dissatisfied with the inner ministers or with the emperor himself. After a long silence, Zhang Jing asked, is there anything you want to confess? Feng Yun only had 2 things. First, to have Qian assigned back to the inner study, and second, to ask for a favor, to let Song Yizhu return home, as she still had relatives there.
All right.
Zhang Jing nodded. Qian came to the prison to visit him, bringing a quilt made by Song Yizhu for him. I told Shen Pu about Yizhu, Qian said. I want him to see how blindly they've slandered someone and to realize that the colleague he admires has worse morals than the castrated official he despises. You didn't have to, Feng Yun said. I just want to make that old man uncomfortable, Qian spat. I knew he wouldn't believe it, so I specifically brought Yizhu with me. You should have seen his expression at the time. Feng Yun smiled and asked, has Yizhu already gone back to her hometown? She left yesterday. She wanted to see you before she left, but she couldn't get in. She cried so much that it gave me a headache.
What about you?
Have you returned to the inner study? Qi Yun remained silent. You've also bought a house, huh? It's time to give up, Feng Yun said. Qi Yun, who had been complaining about the headache caused by Yizhu's crying, started crying too. The house was supposed to be for us to drink and listen to music together. I planned to leave half of it to you when I died, but now you're dying before me. The one who dies last is the problem, Feng Yun smiled. Especially since I'll be taking your half of the house. I'll have to burn incense for you when the time comes. Now, I have nothing to leave you, but if you want to burn some paper, go ahead. If it's inconvenient, then don't. And so, Feng Yun's life was nearly complete with just these few words. Unexpectedly, Shen Pu came with a bottle of autumn wine to visit, saying he had wronged Feng Yun over Song Yizhu's matter and had come to apologize. Feng Yun refused the wine, pushing it back. Lord Shen, you've done your part. There's no need to regret it. If you feel guilty about Song Yizhu, others will say that the accusations against us were false and unreliable. Lord Shen, Feng Yun continued, when we studied together in the inner study, you taught us Zhuang and talked about how to maintain momentum. At the time, I only recited the words, but now I understand. Everything works in the same way. You need that initial burst to succeed. Shen Pu looked at him, somewhat puzzled. It's all right, Feng Yun thought. After I'm dead, Shen Pu and the others will understand that, although I appeared innocent and had few remaining assets, my death will serve as a counterattack against the accusations of the civil officials. But that's a lie I told to Zhang Jing. When I first proposed this plan to him, I was clean. But by the time I was imprisoned, I had accepted dozens of land contracts and promissory notes, secretly hidden imperial paintings, and altered account books by adding my own name. No matter who investigates, I am not the wronged innocent. I'm the corrupt Jiang Feng Yun, Zhang Jing's lackey. Before Shen Pu left, Feng Yun asked, "Why did you never comment on my writing back in the inner study?" Shen Pu hesitated for a moment before answering truthfully, "I had a strong impression of your writing, but I didn't like the inner officials. I felt a mixture of admiration and distaste, while also feeling wary. I was afraid you might one day rise through your writing and knowledge and become a powerful eunuch." Feng Yun smiled, with a hint of satisfaction. He watched Shen Pu's retreating figure and recalled the time when he defended Li Jinhai, causing the scholars to criticize him. He remembered hearing Shen Pu angrily say, "Such people are never good." Feng Yun thought to himself, "I never told Shen Pu that I had refrained from saying anything, that I had spent nights trying to decipher those words, 'never good,' hoping to find approval. Did Shen Pu once have expectations for me, thinking I was different from the eunuchs he despised, believing I could be a good man or even a great man?" But in the end, he couldn't escape his identity as a eunuch. Shi Yun was his partner, and Zhang Jing had once saved his life. He couldn't sever ties with them. He had deep reluctance, but still, he remained an accomplice. He had his share of guilt in the suffering of the merchants oppressed by Li Jinhai, as well as in the misfortunes of the officials suppressed by Zhang Jing. Yet, he couldn't fully side with Zhang Jing. He admired Shen Pu's idealism and his unyielding spirit, and envied Yang Ji's carefree courage. Jiang Fengyun didn't want to die, but Shen Pu and the others couldn't be framed by Zhang Jing, for who else would speak for the people in the future? Feng Yun remembered the year he entered the palace. It was a year of drought and famine, and rumors spread that the government had grain to distribute, but the food never appeared. If people like Shen Pu had stood up back then, perhaps his family would still be together. This life was given to Zhang Jing, but Feng Yun hoped that no more children would ever have to enter the palace like he did. Looking out from the high window of his cell, he saw the snow falling. The new year was approaching, and his execution would likely take place before the year ended. But he was not afraid, nor did he regret it. Jiang Fengyun's life had come to its end. He suddenly remembered the painting he had chosen to secretly keep, a painting titled The Director of Imperial Records by an ordinary artist from the current dynasty. It didn't match with other ancient artworks, but Feng Yun couldn't help but choose it. In the painting, Feng Yun was standing in the courtyard with others on the day he entered the inner study. Scholar Su sat at the center, while Feng Yun and the others stood outside. The breeze was gentle, and the sunlight shone on the pines in the courtyard, their needles glistening with light. That day, Feng Yun was thankful to leave behind the life of sweeping and cleaning, full of hope for the life of studying and writing that lay ahead. He believed there would be a different life waiting for him. Those were the best days of his life.